The Mensah family was admired by everyone in the small town of Mensah. Perched on a hill, their beautiful two-story home was surrounded by vibrant hibiscus and frangipani flowers, a symbol of their wealth and influence. Kofi Mensah, the head of the family, was a man of great stature, both physically and within the community. His booming voice was often heard at town meetings, and his moral lectures were considered gospel. To the townspeople, he was an unshakable pillar of integrity. Alma, his wife, was the perfect complement to Kofi's commanding presence. With her soft-spoken demeanor and ever-present smile, she managed the household with grace. Her days were filled with cooking, cleaning, and ensuring her children always presented their best selves to the world. But behind her warm exterior lay a woman burdened by years of suppressed emotions and silent sacrifices. Their children, Kwame, a confident university student, Isai, a curious and sharp-witted teenager, and Ya, a playful and imaginative boy, completed the picture of a perfect family. Kwame was known as the Golden Boy, destined to follow in his father's footsteps. Isai, though quieter than her brother, was fiercely intelligent and observant. Ya, the youngest, brought lightheartedness to the otherwise disciplined household. However, the beauty of their family dynamic was only skin-deep. Behind closed doors, Kofi's strict discipline bordered on tyranny. His rules were law, and his punishments were swift and severe. Alma often bore the brunt of his anger, shielding the children as much as she could. Her once vibrant spirit had been dulled over the years, and her submissiveness to Kofi's authority had become second nature. One fateful night, a sudden power outage plunged the house into darkness. The family gathered candles and flashlights, but Issei, ever resourceful, decided to search her father's study for an extra flashlight. She hesitated at the doorway. The study was Kofi's sanctuary, a place where even Alma treaded cautiously. But curiosity overruled her fear. The study smelled of polished wood and faint cigar smoke. Isa carefully rummaged through the desk drawers until her hand brushed against something hard and smooth, a small wooden box. Intrigued, she pulled it out and opened it. Inside were old, faded photographs. The images depicted a woman and two children, none of whom Issei recognized. The woman wore a wide-brimmed hat and smiled brightly, her arms draped protectively around the children. Issei's heart raced as she noticed the handwritten name scrawled on the back of one photo, Nana Kwesi. Who were these people, and why did her father have pictures of them hidden away? She quickly returned the box to its hiding place when she heard footsteps approaching and hurried back to her room. The discovery left her restless, her mind swirling with questions. The next morning at breakfast, the family sat around the polished mahogany table. Alma served plantain porridge, and Ya recounted a funny story from school. But Issei remained quiet, her thoughts consumed by the discovery in the study. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, she asked, "Papa, who is Nana Kwesi?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Kofi's hand froze mid-air, his spoon hovering above his bowl. The jovial atmosphere shattered. Emma's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she clutched her apron. Ya looked from his sister to his father, sensing the sudden tension but not understanding its cause. Kofi's voice was low and menacing. "Where did you hear that name?" he demanded, his eyes boring into Issei. Issei's stomach churned. I saw it on a box in your study," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Kofi slammed his spoon onto the table, the clang echoing through the room. "You went into my study," he bellowed, his face darkening with fury. "You are never to enter that room again. Do you understand me?" Issei recoiled, her heart pounding. "Yes, Papa." "I'm sorry," she managed, tears welling in her eyes. Kofi pushed back his chair with such force that it scraped loudly against the floor. He stormed out of the room, leaving the family in stunned silence. Alma tried to comfort Isai with a gentle pat on the shoulder, but her trembling hands betrayed her own fear. Later that night, as the house fell into an uneasy quiet, Isi overheard muffled voices coming from her parents' bedroom. She crept toward the door and pressed her ear against it. They deserved to know the truth, Kofi. Emma's voice was sharp, breaking through the usual tone of deference. You can't keep this hidden forever. Kofi's reply was a harsh whisper. Don't you dare bring this up again, Alma. I'll handle it my way. Handle it. Amma retorted bitterly. You've been handling it for years, and look where we are now. You've built this house of lies, Kofi. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. Hisi's breath hitched as she backed away from the door. Her mother's words confirmed her worst fears. There were secrets in the Mensah household, and they ran deeper than she had imagined. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Issa resolved to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The Mensah household became a boiling pot of tension. Kofi's once imposing presence now carried an air of vulnerability, though his temper flared more frequently. Amma, usually composed and diligent, seemed perpetually distracted, her eyes distant and her movements heavy. Dinner conversations grew shorter, marked by uneasy silences. The atmosphere was so thick with tension that even Ya, normally carefree, seemed subdued. Quaim, now in his final year at university, had always chafed under Kofi's strict rule. However, his father's increasing paranoia and defensiveness raised suspicions he couldn't ignore. Kofi's insistence that the family avoid certain topics and his sudden bursts of anger left Quaim seething. One evening, after yet another unexplained outburst from Kofi, Quaim stood up at the dinner table, his jaw clenched. "What are you hiding from us, Papa?" he demanded, his voice firm but trembling with frustration. Kofi glared at him, his dark eyes narrowing. "Mind your tongue, boy," he barked. "You know nothing of what it takes to protect this family." Quaim's frustration boiled over. Protect us from what? Or is it yourself you're trying to protect? The room fell silent. Amma's hand trembled as she clutched her glass of water, while Issa looked between her brother and father, her own heart pounding. Kofi stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Amma tried to placate her son, but Quaim had made up his mind. That night, when the house was silent, he crept into Kofi's study. The room felt colder than he expected, and the faint scent of cigar smoke lingered in the air. His flashlight beam illuminated stacks of papers and books, but his eyes were drawn to a locked cabinet. He pried it open with a letter opener he'd brought, and behind a pile of ledgers, he found a journal with a worn leather cover. The initials Kian were embossed on the front. Sitting cross-legged on the study floor, Quaim flipped through the pages. His pulse quickened as he deciphered his father's neat but hurried handwriting. The journal chronicled a hidden life, a life Kofi had kept buried. It began with entries about a woman named Afia. Kofi had met her during a business trip years ago, and their relationship had quickly turned romantic. Afia became pregnant, and Kofi maintained a double life for years, splitting his time between his legitimate family and his mistress. 2 children were born, a boy and a girl, but as the relationship grew complicated, Kofi distanced himself. When Afia demanded he leave Amma, Kofi abruptly ended the affair, returning to Insu to rebuild his image as a devout family man. Quaim's hands trembled as he read further. The most chilling entry described how Afia's children had died. Kofi had dismissed their deaths as an accident, but the villagers where Afia lived had a different story. Whispers of a curse began circulating, rumors that Kofi's abandonment had brought misfortune upon the children. Some claimed their deaths were the result of a spiritual vengeance, the ancestors punishing Kofi for his betrayal. The journal ended abruptly, with no acknowledgement of remorse, only a cold resolve to keep the truth hidden. Quaim felt sick to his stomach. His father, the man who had built a reputation on righteousness, had destroyed lives and erased them as if they never existed. Clutching the journal, Quaim returned to his room, his mind reeling. The next day, he shared the revelations with Isai. Together, they confronted Alma, desperate for answers. When they showed her the journal, she broke down, her sobs racking her frail body. "I knew about Afia," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I begged him to tell you children, to make amends. But he said his reputation was all he had. He said what happened to her and those poor children wasn't his fault. But I know better." Isi's heart sank. "Mama, why didn't you leave him?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. Emma's voice was barely audible. "Because I thought keeping this family intact was more important than the truth. But I was wrong. I see that now." After Emma's confession, the unease in the Mensah household turned into full-blown dread. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began to plague the family. It started with the livestock. Their chickens, once healthy and prolific, began dying mysteriously. The goats became restless, bleating through the night as though sensing an unseen presence. Amma dismissed it as a coincidence, but Quaim and Issei weren't so sure. Then Ya fell ill. It began with a mild fever, but within days, his condition worsened. The family doctor was baffled. Ya had no clear symptoms of any known disease, yet his body grew weaker by the day. Amma stayed by his bedside, praying fervently, while Kofi paced the house, his hands clasped behind his back, muttering scripture under his breath. Isi's nightmares began soon after. Each night, she dreamt of two children standing at the edge of her bed. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and they whispered her name in voices that sent chills down her spine. "Help us," they begged. "Don't forget us." She would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart racing. The house itself began to feel oppressive. The air seemed heavier, and an eerie silence hung over the rooms. Even Kofi, who had always exuded confidence, appeared shaken. His once commanding voice trembled as he led the family in prayer, and dark circles rimmed his eyes from sleepless nights. Amma overheard him muttering apologies in Twai during the early hours of the morning, his hands gripping his Bible as if it were a lifeline. One night, Quaim caught Kofi burning papers in the backyard. "What are you doing?" Quaim demanded, his voice sharp. "Mind your business, boy." Kofi snapped, but his hands shook as he fed more documents into the flames. Quaim couldn't see what was written on them, but he suspected they were tied to the secrets his father was so desperate to bury. As the family unraveled, whispers of the curse spread through the village. Neighbors avoided the Mensahs, crossing the street to avoid their home. Children whispered tales of ghosts haunting the house on the hill, and elders warned of the consequences of ignoring ancestral wrath. Emma, once the steadfast heart of the family, began to crumble under the weight of it all. "This house isn't safe anymore," she whispered to Quaim one night. "We need to leave. But your father, he'll never agree." The family, trapped by both Kofi's stubborn pride and the specter of the past, found themselves teetering on the edge of despair. And the spirits of Kofi's sins, it seemed, were just getting started. It didn't take long for news of the Mensah family's troubles to ripple through the tight-knit community. What had once been admiration for the respectable patriarch and his picture-perfect family turned into a storm of gossip and judgment. In the market, women whispered behind their woven baskets, their voices laced with a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. "Have you heard about the Mensahs?" one woman said, leaning in conspiratorially. They say the curse of the abandoned family is haunting them. The children are ill, the livestock is dying. You reap what you sow, another added, shaking her head. The villagers were divided. Some blamed Amma for staying silent all these years, accusing her of enabling Kofi's behavior. A woman should protect her family, not cover for a man who shames them, one elder muttered. Others placed the blame squarely on Kofi, labeling him a hypocrite who had built his moral authority on a foundation of lies. The whispers stung, but the stares were worse. Every step outside the house felt like walking into a courtroom where every neighbor was a judge, jury, and executioner. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, an elderly woman arrived at the Mensah home. Nana Ya, the village's spiritual guide, was a figure of quiet authority. Her frail frame belied the power in her presence, and her wisdom was revered by young and old alike. She had heard the whispers and come to see for herself what darkness lingered in the once proud home. Amma greeted her at the door, her face lined with exhaustion. "Nana Ya, please come in," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. The old woman entered slowly, her walking stick tapping against the tiled floor. She glanced around, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The wilted flowers in the vase, the untouched food on the dining table, the sense of heaviness that seemed to hang in the air like a shroud. "The spirits of the children are restless," Nana Ya said matter-of-factly, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "Their pain echoes in this house, and it will not cease until the sins that brought it here are acknowledged." Her words sent chills through the family. Amma clasped her hands together, her face pale but resolute. Quay Manisi exchanged uneasy glances, while Kofa sat stiffly in his armchair, his jaw clenched. "I owe no one an explanation," Kofi said, his voice low but filled with defiance. "My past is my business. This house is under my roof, and I'll not have anyone meddling in it." Nana Ya turned her piercing gaze on him. "Your pride will destroy you, Kofi Mensah. And not just you, your family will suffer for it. The spirits demand justice, and you will not find peace until you grant it." Amma, Quaim, and Isai begged Kofi to listen. "Please, Papa," Isai pleaded. "If there's even a chance to make things right, we have to try." But Kofi waved them off, retreating to his study and slamming the door behind him. His pride was a fortress he refused to abandon, even as it began to crumble around him. Later that night, as the family sat in uneasy silence, Amma made a decision. She could no longer allow her husband's stubbornness to dictate their fate. If Kofi refused to act, she would take matters into her own hands. Amma's resolve led her to a small, crumbling house on the outskirts of town. It was here that Afia's surviving sister, Abina, lived in quiet obscurity. The journey was both literal and emotional, a step toward confronting the truth that had haunted Amma for years. When Abina opened the door, her face hardened at the sight of Amma. "What do you want?" she asked curtly, her voice laced with bitterness. Amma hesitated, then knelt at the threshold, her head bowed. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness," she said. "For my silence, for my complicity, for everything my husband has done to you and your family." Abina stared at her for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in," she said, her tone softening slightly. Inside, the walls were bare and the furniture was sparse. Abina's hands trembled as she poured tea, her movements slow and deliberate. She sat across from Amma, her eyes filled with years of pain. "He left her with nothing," Abina began, her voice trembling. "She begged him to stay, not for herself, but for the children. When he walked away, it broke her. And when the children died, she wasn't the same. She passed shortly after, some say from grief, others from the curse he brought upon us." Amma felt the weight of Abana's words like a physical blow. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I knew he had hurt you, but I didn't know how much." Abana's gaze was piercing. "And now you've come to make amends? Do you think that will bring them back?" "No," Alma said, her voice steady despite the tears. "But I can try to bring peace to their spirits. Please come to our home. Help us do what's right." After a long pause, Abana nodded. For them, not for him. The following evening, Abana arrived at the Mensah household, carrying a small bundle of herbs and candles. Kofi was livid when he saw her. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, his voice rising. Alma stepped forward, her chin held high. "She's here to help us bring closure. If you won't do it, I will." "You're humiliating me," Kofi shouted. "No, you humiliated yourself," Alma retorted, her voice cutting through his bluster. "This is not about you anymore." The family gathered in the living room as Abana prepared for the ritual. She lit candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew heavy, the smell of burning herbs filling the room. As Abana chanted in her native dialect, the atmosphere shifted. The room felt colder, and the faint sound of children's laughter echoed through the air. Kofi sat stiffly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. For the first time, his defiance seemed to waver. Alma held tightly to Ya, who shivered in her arms, while Quaymanisi exchanged wide-eyed glances. As the ritual ended, Abana turned to Kofi. "The spirits will not rest until you speak the truth. You must go to their graves and acknowledge what you've done." Kofi's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He said nothing, but the silence spoke volumes. The weight of his sins was no longer something he could ignore. The air in the Mensah household was thick with tension as Nana Ya, the village spiritual guide, lit the final candle for the ritual. The dim, flickering light cast shadows that seemed to dance along the walls, mirroring the unease in the room. The family sat in a tight circle, their faces a blend of fear, anger, and expectation. Kofi, the once unshakable patriarch, now looked smaller than ever, his usually stern expression replaced by one of barely concealed dread. Nana Ya's voice was calm but firm as she addressed Kofi. "The spirits are restless because of the weight of your lies. You cannot hide from them, nor from us. Confess, Kofi. Lay bare the truth that has poisoned your family." For a moment, the room was silent, save for the crackle of the candles. Kofi's hands trembled as he clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated, his gaze darting to his wife and children. Amma's eyes bore into him, a mixture of anger and anguish, while Issa and Quaim stared with unblinking intensity. Even young Ya, who had been clinging to Amma's side, watched his father with wide, questioning eyes. Finally, the dam broke. Kofi let out a shuddering breath and began to speak, his voice low and shaky. "I was a coward," he admitted. "Years ago, I met Afia. She was kind, beautiful, and vulnerable. I told myself it was a fleeting moment, a mistake, but it became something more. I promised her things I had no right to promise, and when the weight of my lies became too much, I ran." His voice cracked as he continued. "I abandoned her and my own children. I thought if I left, I could bury the shame, bury the guilt. But I couldn't. When I heard they had died, I knew I was to blame. Their deaths are on my hands." The room remained silent as Kofi's confession hung in the air, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. For the first time, tears streamed down his face, his usual stoic demeanor shattered. He looked to Alma, his voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting this family by keeping it hidden, but all I did was destroy everything we had." Amma's face was unreadable. She looked at her husband, the man she had stood by for decades, and saw not the strong leader she once believed in, but a broken, deeply flawed human being. Isi, sitting beside her, couldn't contain her disgust. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you preach about honor and morality while doing this?" Quaim, though equally furious, placed a hand on his sister's shoulder. "We've heard the truth now, Isai," he said quietly. "And it's ugly. But what matters is what we do next." Nana Yai observed the family's reactions carefully before speaking. "Confession is only the first step," she said. "Kofi, the spirits demand more than your words. You must seek forgiveness, not just from them, but from those you've wronged." The days following the ritual brought a strange calm to the Mensah household. The oppressive energy that had loomed over them seemed to dissipate, replaced by a tentative sense of clarity. Ya's fever broke, and he began to regain his strength, his laughter slowly returning to the house. The livestock stopped dying mysteriously, and Isi's nightmares ceased. It felt as though the curse had lifted, but the family knew the damage to their relationships would not heal as easily. Alma, now emboldened by the events, made a decision that would change their lives forever. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, she sat across from Kofi in the dimly lit living room. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I spent my life supporting you, covering for you, and sacrificing my own happiness. But this is too much. I need to think of myself now, and the children." Kofi's face crumpled. "Amma, please," he begged. "I know I've made unforgivable mistakes, but I can change. I want to make things right." Amma shook her head. "This isn't about you anymore, Kofi. It's about me. It's about them. I'm filing for separation. I need to build a life where I'm not living in your shadow." The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. Oma, determined to reclaim her independence, began making plans to move to the city with Isai and Ya. She contacted old friends, applied for jobs, and even started attending a women's support group in the neighboring town. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. Issei, though still grappling with the betrayal, found solace in the idea of starting anew. She threw herself into her studies, preparing for university, and vowing to never let herself be trapped in a life of silence and submission. Quaim, on the other hand, chose to stay in the village, taking on the role of protector and provider. "I'll keep an eye on him," he told Amma, referring to Kofi. "But my focus is on Ya and making sure he grows up better than we did." Kofi, left alone in the once bustling house, was a shell of his former self. Stripped of his family's trust and the community's respect, he spent his days in solitude, haunted by the faces of the children he had abandoned. He began volunteering at the local church, hoping to find redemption through acts of service, but the guilt never fully left him. Months later, Amma, Isi, and Ya moved into a modest apartment in the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs, a space free of secrets and lies. Alma started a small catering business, pouring her energy into creating something of her own. Isai thrived at university, her essays often exploring themes of resilience and justice. Ya, the youngest, adjusted well, his cheerful nature returning as he adapted to their new life. Back in the village, Quaim grew into a responsible and respected young man. He took over some of Kofi's old duties, becoming a mentor to younger boys in the community and using his experiences to teach them the importance of honesty and accountability. Though their paths had diverged, the Mensah family found a new kind of strength in their separation. The scars of their past remained, but they had each learned valuable lessons about resilience, truth, and the power of breaking free from cycles of pain. When Amma looked back on her life in the grand house atop the hill, she no longer felt the sting of regret. Instead, she saw a woman who had faced unimaginable darkness and emerged stronger. The Mensah family's story, though fraught with pain, became a testament to the healing power of truth and the courage it takes to start over. The Mensah family's story reverberated throughout the village for years to come, a stark cautionary tale whispered in marketplaces, at church gatherings, and around evening fires. The grand house on the hill, once a symbol of power and prestige, now stood as a reminder of the fragile line between appearance and reality. For the villagers, the story of Kofi Mensah became a powerful lesson, a testament to the dangers of buried truths and the strength it takes to confront them. For Yatund, now a thriving medical student in the bustling city, the memories of her family's unraveling were bittersweet. She often found herself reflecting on the duality of her father, the man who had once held her hand and told her bedtime stories, and the man whose actions had nearly destroyed their family. Yatun didn't shy away from these memories. Instead, she carried them like a badge of honor, a testament to her resilience. One afternoon, during a university seminar on mental health and family dynamics, Yatun found herself sharing her story. Her voice, steady yet tinged with emotion, captivated the room. "We were broken," she said, her words resonating deeply with her peers. "But in breaking, we found a way to heal. Sometimes the only way to rebuild is to let everything fall apart first." Her story inspired many in her class. Some approached her afterward, sharing their own struggles with family secrets and hidden pain. Yatund realized that her past, though painful, had given her a unique strength and purpose. She resolved to specialize in community medicine, focusing on mental health and family counseling, so she could help others navigate the darkness she had once endured. Back in the village, Emma's catering business flourished. Her reputation as a skilled and compassionate entrepreneur spread quickly, and she became a source of inspiration for women who felt trapped in oppressive relationships. Amma often spoke at women's groups and community events, sharing her journey of rediscovery and independence. "Silence can suffocate you," she told them. "But speaking up, even when it terrifies you, can set you free." Quaim, still in the village, became a respected leader in his own right. He organized mentorship programs for young boys, teaching them the importance of integrity and emotional accountability, qualities he once wished his father had possessed. Though his relationship with Kofi remained strained, Quaim found peace in knowing he was breaking the cycle of secrecy and neglect. Ya, the youngest, grew into a curious and kind teenager under Amma's nurturing care. Though he carried faint memories of the turmoil in their family, Amma ensured that his life was filled with stability and love. He often visited Quaim in the village, finding in his older brother a role model he deeply admired. As for Kofi, the years had not been kind to him. Stripped of his family's trust and the respect of the village, he lived in quiet isolation, spending his days tending to the house and volunteering at the church. Though he sought redemption through small acts of service, he remained haunted by the faces of the children he had abandoned and the family he had hurt. The man who had once commanded fear and admiration was now a shadow of his former self, consumed by the cost of his choices. One evening, years after leaving the village, Yatund returned for a brief visit. She walked through the familiar streets, greeted by both warm smiles and wary glances. Some villagers still avoided her, seeing her as the one who had exposed the family's secrets, but others thanked her quietly, recognizing the courage it had taken to speak the truth. As Yatund stood outside the house on the hill, now weathered and overgrown with vines, she felt a surge of emotion. The memories of her childhood, both joyful and painful, flooded back. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to hate the place. It was here that she had learned the hardest but most valuable lessons of her life. That night, as the stars lit up the sky, Yatund sat with Alma, Quame, and Ya, sharing stories and laughter. Though they were no longer the picture-perfect family the village once envied, they had found something far more valuable: honesty, resilience, and the strength to rebuild. Their journey had been marked by pain, but it had also revealed the power of truth and the unbreakable bonds of a family determined to heal. The Mensah family story, once a source of shame, became a legacy of courage and a beacon of hope for others seeking to break free from the weight of silence.